Hello and welcome to Read Red, slight rebranding if you've watched my other videos, I hope you don't mind. Today I'm talking about the collected short stories of Anton Chekhov, published by Arcturus Publishing, and I thoroughly enjoyed this book. A solid 4-star book, maybe, I don't know, like for me a 5-star, usually the only thing that distinguishes a 4 and a 5-star book is whether I want to reread it, and I can imagine I would want to reread this because of how many of these like tags that indicate that for this book are like go back and reread this story. So maybe it's a 5-star book, I don't know, but I do want to talk about some of the stories. I want to talk about some particular Kafka-like themes. I know the term is Kafkaesque, but I kind of hate saying Kafkaesque because of how often it's said. I've already said it twice, But before I get into that, I do want to quickly talk about this publishing because how lovely is this cover? It's just, it's got this weird sort of exaggerated color fairy tale, and I have some more books by the publishing because I bought this big, book bundle from Book Grocer, an Australian store, and here are some other books from them. Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, and also The Double, Heart of Darkness, and some Tales of Unrest, The Great Gatsby, The Good Soldier, Dubliners, and yeah, some other really cool things. If you haven't picked them up, I really recommend it because they're modernly published, published in 2022, and yeah, got them for a pretty good deal. So, enough of talking about the publishing, though. I do want to talk about Chekhov's short stories. So, if you don't know, Chekhov was a Russian writer from the late 19th century. He was a big influence, according to this introduction, on Woolf, Joyce, and somebody else, George Bernard Shaw. However, I don't know if this is like I said, there are some Kafka-like themes, and I don't know if it's just a coincidence. Kafka was born 20 years after Chekhov, but I'm going to be jumping around between the book because the short stories are not particularly in any order. Like maybe the best one is the second story, which is Fat and Thin, but I'll get to that. I want to just get the Kafka stuff out of the way because I've already mentioned it. There are two stories that feel that have that sort of particular feeling. The first one is In the Court, which, quick summary, basically it's a story set in a court proceeding. All of the officials, all of the jury, everyone's just going through all of the rote movements to kind of convict this murderer, and the murderer has this moment of realizing that he was so sort of anxious and nervous, but then when he actually got there, it was such a bore. And I want to read this entire section because this was the first time that I really wanted to note the particular Kafka-Chekhov similarities. At first the prisoner turned pale and coughed nervously into his sleeve, but soon the stillness, the general monotony, and boredom infected him too. He looked with dull-witted respectfulness at the judges' uniforms, at the weary faces of the jurymen, and blinked calmly. The surroundings and procedure of the court, the expectation of which had so weighed on his soul while he was awaiting them in prison, now had the most soothing effect on him. What he met here was not at all what he could have expected. The charge of murder hung over him, and yet here he met with neither threatening faces, nor indignant looks, nor loud phrases about retribution, nor sympathy for his extraordinary fate. Not one of those who were judging him looked at him with earnest or for long. The dingy windows and walls, the voice of the secretary, the attitude of the prosecutor were all saturated with official indifference and produced an atmosphere of frigidity, and as though the murderer were simply an official property, or as though he were not being judged by living men, but by some unseen machine set going, goodness knows how or by whom. Yeah, really eerie, right? Like if you've read Kafka's short stories, then that's such a crazy comparison. And do let me know. Like I did some quick tertiary Wikipediaing, and I couldn't see if they were influenced by each other. But yeah, do let me know. The second time I wanted to mention the influence is there's a short story. I think I realized I forgot to put a tag in it, but it's called A Play, which is pretty much this this weird story where this guy Pavel Vasilievich gets approached by a lady with a script for a play that she just really begs him to read to her, and the play gets so it's so bad and just cringeworthy that he eventually okay, big spoiler alert again, he eventually just grabs a paperweight and smashes her head in, and then right afterwards he says, "Give me in charge, I've killed her," he said to the maidservant who ran in a minute later. The last sentence, the jury acquitted him. And I was like, what a weird, a funny story. It's got a funny punchline, no doubt, but it still had that same sort of creeping build up to such a hilariously dramatic ending, absurd. I mean, I guess absurd's probably a more technically correct term. Those were the two big Kafka influences. Maybe there's also the story Sleepy, which was a bit too dark in terms of I wouldn't say it was too dark for me, but it is a bit I don't know, there was a weird balance in that story that didn't quite resonate with me, but pretty much it's really a great sort of almost stream of consciousness story of this lady, a nurse, Varka, who's kind of trying to keep a baby awake and do household chores and stuff while she's just super, super sleep deprived, and she eventually is the baby is the cause of all of these problems, and she censorship warning, and then just crawls on the floor and sleeps in peace. And that was it's a pretty hectic story, and it's so funny how Chekhov can ping pong between things that are just funny, like his first story of in the barbershop, and a story like that, which is Sleepy, which is just so dark. Oh, here's another thing. Sorry, I've got a third Kafkaesque point. There's a big story called Rothschild's Fiddle, which is probably one of the longer stories in this book, in this collection. But I wanted to point it out. I'm going to assume that you've read it, because pretty much there's a coffin maker who's also a fiddle player or violinist, and he has this sort of interaction go between a Jewish I can't remember what he plays actually. I think he's a flutist or flautist, but at the end Rothschild gets sick after his wife dies. He eventually gives the fiddle to the Jewish musician, and the last sentence really struck out to me, because the Jewish musician is so moved by this guy with such an unfortunate lot in life. He comes from this town where I think it's described as a town where people are too old and they die too infrequently. But this last sentence is so great. The musician is so influenced by him that he learns to play the fiddle, and then it says, and this new air was so much liked in the town that the merchants and officials used to be continually sending for Rothschild and making him play it over and over again a dozen times. Sorry, just realized a mistake. Yakov is the main guy, and Rothschild is the guy who is the Jew who gets the fiddle given to him. What a weird story, because, well, not weird, but that was kind of, I don't know if it's necessarily Kafka, but it was funny in that absurd sort of way, capitalizing on the tragedy of this guy's death, and that they were, everybody so much loved the mood that they wanted to, Rothschild got all of these patrons and was able to make a living, but not Yakov, the guy who originally played like that. A really great story. There are a couple of really great insights that I wanted to highlight, or one in particular that I've got here is from the story Champagne, a Wayfarer's story. You know, people who are vain and not very clever have moments when the consciousness that they are miserable affords them positive satisfaction, and they even coquette with their misery for their own entertainment. There was a great deal of truth in what I thought, but there was also a great deal that was absurd and conceited, and there was something boyishly defiant in my question, what worse could happen? I'm curious as to how much post-Dostoevsky influence there is in Chekhov's stories. I might not actually even say too much more about his stories, because there are some great ones that I wanted to leave out. And yeah, I don't know if there's much more that I want to say about Chekhov. A lot of the stories are really, like, there's not really any bad stories in here. Some of them, like the lady with the dog is what it ends on, and I didn't like that story as much. I don't know why it didn't really. It almost had it almost felt like the whole arc of the brothers Karamazov, like almost all of Dmitri's arc of the brothers Karamazov in one short story of, you know, that length, with maybe. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of how to amend that without spoiling either of them. Yeah, I guess if you've read it, you know what I mean. But yeah, definitely give the selected stories of Chekhov a shot. Let me know if it's worth getting his complete stories. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.